Good morning, everyone. Welcome to English 164. For today's video, we're going to tackle about elicitation procedures. Let's have an overview about the topic. What is elicitation? What are the types of elicitation procedures? Interviews and types of interviews. Questionnaires. Combining questionnaires and interview data. Production task and test type of production task. Advantages of elicitation procedure and disadvantage of elicitation procedures. Hello, I am Pina Santiago, welcome year bio student of Mindanao State University of Philippines. What is elicitation? According to Nonan and Bailey, it means all of the methods used by the researcher to get information directly from the informants. In this procedure, you have to interact with them, so it doesn't mean that you just observe them. It can take place with the teacher, the students, some aspect of student-teacher interaction. What are the types of elicitation procedures? Elicitation procedure include interviews, questionnaires, combining questionnaire and interview data production task. According to Burgess, 1987, page 102, he described them as a conversation with a purpose. Their purpose is to find out more about the teachers and student background, more about the teachers and students' reported behavior, more about the teachers and learners' opinion and attitudes about various aspects of language learning. Interviews can be conducted as you can see in these photos. Types of interviews: structured interviews, semi-structured interviews, and structured interviews, ethnographic interviews, and focus group interviews. Structured interviews orally rather than in writing, one person at a time, recording of the person's answer by tick-the-box kind of coding scheme. Questions prepared in advance in the same order, getting the same specific information from one person, following closely the predetermined agenda. Results can be turned into numerical data as some questions will involve close, factual kits of responses. Detailed data to compare all the informants. The semi-structured interview still structured and organized, but also more open. A set of topics or some specific questions, providing some flexibility and unexpected responses that will lead you into new discoveries. The aim is to compare your participants' responses, but also allow you for individual diversity and flexibility. More difficult to manage as it requires some skill in following the lead of the participant. The advantage over the structured interview is that you can find out about some things in more depth and so will get richer information. Unstructured interviews. No pre-planned questions. These interviews are individualized. Their purpose is to bring out issues related to your research. A set of questions or topics in mind in direction of the interview to be determined by the participant. As much in-depth information as possible about the speaker's experiences, views, perspectives, and beliefs. Your role will be to acknowledge and encourage the interviewee to say more about the overall topics, but not to intervene in where the speaker decides the conversation should go. This is the most demanding among them all. Unstructured interviews, a high level of trust between interviewee and interviewer, and careful handling because of the unpredictability of the conversation. More difficult to make comparisons across your interview because of highly individualized nature of responses. A cautious analysis and not basing your insights on your own interpretation rather than those of the speaker. The ethnographic interviews, a qualitative technique that studies the cultural patterns of participants in their natural settings, a discovery oriented that the informant controls what he wants to share with the interviewer. It involves spending an extensive amount of time with the participants. Traditional interviewer and interviewee rules reverse, must develop and maintain positive relationship, rapport, series of friendly conversations. So this is an example of question type. Grand tour, elicit information about broad experiences. Tell me about your typical day for you, your child. Mini tour, describe a specific activity or event. Tell me about the typical mealtime with Paul. Tell me about a typical storytelling session. Example, take an experience and ask for an example. Give me an example of what Paul does when he cannot make himself understood. Sarah, give me an example of overtaxing yourself. And another example is from experience. Ask about experience in a particular setting. Tell me about your experience with Paul's teacher. Tell me about your student services. In native language, seek an understanding of how persons uses terms and phrases. What would I see when you say Paul hurts himself? What's another way you would describe being overtaxed? Focus group interviews. Structured small group interviews, an expensive rapid technique, focus in two ways. First, the interviewees are similar in some ways. Second, its aim is to gather information about a particular topic, guided by a set of focus questions. Participants hear and interact with each other and the leader. A facilitator guides 7 to 11 people in a discussion of their experiences, feelings, and preferences about the topic. Questionnaires. Similar to structured interviews, especially the close-ended items, can be broadcasted or analyzed easily with the help of technology. Avoid ambiguous and unclear questions, especially when administering in second language of the respondents. Example of questionnaire. So a yes or no, I have written a journal before. We have some options here, yes, no, and sometimes. Example for questionnaire number 2, multiple choice items, rank order items, and open items. Another example of a questionnaire, guided items and structured items. Just like, please provide comments on teaching grammar by completing the sentence. The thing I like the best about teaching grammar is blank. The thing I like least about teaching grammar is blank. Combining questionnaire and interview data. Questionnaires and interviews work well together. Practical and convenient versus less practical but detailed. Questionnaires let us sample broadly while interviews explore more deeply. You can apply questionnaires first to get a broad information and then interview to have more detailed data. After applying a questionnaire to a large group, you divide them into 2 groups and then select a few people who represent the larger sample accordingly. To carefully define criteria in each group, sample, resample, process, to praise and raise the sign. Production task. Techniques used to obtain samples of learner language in order to study development that learners pass through while dealing with the second language. Observation and recording of learner language are very time-consuming and may not give us enough material to detect patterns to learn about language development. Learners may not produce a particular structure in your present, and it doesn't mean that they haven't acquired it. Types of production tasks. Discourse completion tasks, role plays, tasks used as elicitation procedures, picture description tasks, using tasks to investigate negotiation of meaning. Discourse completion task. The researcher sets up a context and provides part of the discourse. He or she expects that the learners complete the interaction by expressing what he or she were actually in such a context. Without this task, it is difficult to obtain natural samples. We have to get the permission to record their speech or wait for non-native speakers of the target language to come and voice out target sample. An example for discourse completion test. Read the following situation and decide how you would respond and write your response in the blanks provided. So this is an example of a discourse completion task. Another example of discourse completion task. It can be framed as a brief conversation and students are expected to complete the conversation. Some friends are over at your house. One of them looks at the clock hanging on the wall and says, I love your clock. It looks great in your living room. And your answer. Role plays. It is used for data collection as well as language assessment. It helps the researcher gain insight into feelings of the participants and discover what is important to them. The scenario is set by the researchers and the dialogue must be spontaneous. It is considered that whether personality or acting ability may influence the outcome by Van Lett, 1989. It can also be difficult to perform in second language for the participants. To avoid anxiety, it should be stated that their responses will not be graded. An example for role plays. You are one of the best students in your class or office. Your articles have been published in popular journals in your field. There is a newcomer to your class or office. You know each other's name and have said hello to each other sometimes, but not yet had a chance to talk much. It is now around 5 p.m. and you're leaving the school for home. You're walking in the parking lot towards your new car or motorcycle. That new classmate or colleague approaches you and says some greetings. You two talk while walking together. So this is a scenario of a role play. Another example of role play, where there is a train station, call, student travel, bakery or bookshop, Mayor, David Jones, KFC, parking lot of the university. So this is an example of a setup. Tests used as elicitation procedures. There are used to elicit language samples from learning. According to Wishy 1983, they should include the stimulus material, the task posed to the learner's response, the scoring criteria. Forms of tests, dictations. First, just listen. I will speak quiet, quickly, in a natural voice. Second, listen and write. I will speak more slowly. Third, listen to the first file again and check and make any corrections you think necessary. Check what you have written. Another example of a test, a closed passages. And another example of a test, multiple choice items and matching items. Tests used as elicitation procedures appropriate for your research, the age, the proficiency level of the people involved. Two forms of tests used in language classroom research. Oral proficiency interviews, standardized language test. So, oral proficiency interviews, not learner's idea, but language used to express those ideas is important. Some interview formats, ILR or Interagency Language Roundtable, using ratings of 0 to 5 with plus factors. ACTFL, American Council of Teachers of Foreign Language, uses category levels of novice low, novice mid, novice high, intermediate low. Conducted by trained interviewers, recorded and rated by trained raters. What they say is what you get. This is an example of assessing oral proficiency. Standardized language test. Administered under uniform conditions. Scores are recorded on standardized scale that does not vary in any conditions. Example of these kinds of tests are IELTS, TOEFL, or TOEIC, and many more. Way to use tests in language CR. They form the different variable in a study while comparing groups. They determine what groups of learners are involved in a study to compare learners after a certain curriculum, to define the types of learners, and to classify people into different levels. We should select appropriate tests for the purpose of our study. Traditional criteria for evaluating test. We have the reliability. It is consistent across administration when specialty ratings are involved. Validity. Is it actually assessing what it was designed to measure? Practicality. How many resources are used in developing, administering, and scoring a test in order to get the needed information? Washback. What is the effect of a test on teaching and learning? Picture description test. Morpheme acquisition studies are designed to overcome the shortcomings of naturalistic observation by setting up situations forcing production of target language items. Their aim is to investigate the order in which a certain grammatical morphemes were acquired, establish that the acquisition orders were identical regardless of learners' first language, so they tried to change the natural order of acquisition through a series of classroom interventions. An example of picture description task. So as you can see, you see a mouse, where, point to mice in picture 8, what are those? So this is an example of a picture description task. Problems while applying picture description task. We should come up with a prompt that does not include the target structure. If the informant doesn't utter the target item, it doesn't mean that he or she hasn't required it. We should ask the follow-up question to lead him or her to the target item. The language that is stimulated by the elicitation instrument might be the result of the instrument itself. For example, as BSM cartoons generally showed people doing things, percent progressive appeared with a great regularity. Using tasks to investigate negotiation. Interactional modification are known as negotiation of meaning, including comprehension checks, clarification requests, and so on. They help the learners to improve their second language acquisition because they need to reformulate their utterance in order to make it more comprehensible. With the help of reduction tasks, learners have an opportunity to negotiate meaning, especially with two tasks. Rather than being optional, information should be required by the task. Martin, 1996 to 2001, carried out a classroom-based research and used 5 production tasks and isolated 4 cognitive demand features. Tasks with highest cognitive demand, such as the opinion exchange task, generated the most interactional modification, while jigsaw tasks with relatively low cognitive demand generated the fewest modifications. So this is an example of Martin's study, Interactional Modification from Naunan 2004, page 89, adapted from Martin 2001. So as you can see here, there are illustrated the task type, the contextual support, the reasoning required, the degree of task structure, the available knowledge. So JSO, embedded, not required, high, and given. Information, embedded, not required, high, and given. Exchange for one learner, problem, sum, required, varies, given, and so on. So the advantages of elicitation procedures, they're also available that they can result in data that are incredibly rich. They can also be used in combination. These combinations helps in methods in triangulation. They can be a great time savers as they will provide large amount of data in much shorter time and naturalistic observation. They provide data that could not be obtained by any other way. So that would be all, and that is the coverage of my report. Thank you, and God bless us all.